welcome to West is Best, episode 4. If you couldn't tell, I got a new setup. I've sort of made it look a bit better and a bit more comfortable, and I have my computer at close area so I can check my notes easier. And so I hope you enjoy the new setup. Tell me what you think in the comments. Any suggestions, leave them in the comments, but let's get into the episode. So today we are talking about Nazism and why Nazism is not part of Western civilization. And it did come from the West, it came from Europe, but it itself is not part of the idea of what Western civilization is, much like communism isn't part of Western civilization, although it was developed in the West. Same country, actually. And that all sort of goes back to the reign of Augustus during the Roman Empire, and I'm going to skip over a lot with this, but basically there was a large Roman presence, military presence in Germania, which is now Germany, and they were ambushed in the Teutoburg Forest in one of the worst Roman defeats in their entire history, and 3 legions were destroyed, and that was when the Romans said, we're not going into Germany, we're not going to conquer it, and we're not going to make it part of Rome. And that really sort of split Germany since the time of the Roman Empire. It sort of split Germany from the rest of Europe, as Germany was never Romanized quite like the rest of Europe was, because they were actually conquered by the Roman Empire. And that would be important in the development of the culture, because they weren't exactly culturally the same as, say, the British or the French or the Spanish, who all were, or the Italians or the Swiss or a lot of other Europeans who were conquered by the Romans. And this is something that has been talked about a lot, that the Nazis actually were leftists. They were not right, and I'm going to talk about in a future video anarchy and communism, which are 2 extremes on the left and the right. And this is the other extreme on the left. The extreme on the right is anarchy, because the right believes in more freedom. Like, you don't jump from hardcore libertarian, legalized drugs, everyone should have an AR-15, to no one should have any guns, only soldiers have drugs, which you can find, like, Invitica made a great video on the Nazis and their drug use, but that's out of the scope of this video. That, only soldiers should use drugs, huge state censorship, giant government, you don't jump from small government, everyone should be well armed, like the libertarian to that authoritarian Nazism. That just doesn't make any sense. You jump from hardcore libertarian to anarchy, where there is no government at all, and, that's another dumb idea in its own right, and I'll make a separate video on that. Nazism is on the left, because the more left you go, the more restriction you have, the more government you have. But let's talk about proof that the Nazis were socialist, and that a lot of their ideas were anti-Western. Starting with their economy, which is, of course, the most important part of socialism. And Hitler said that, quote, "We are socialists. We're the enemies of today's capitalistic economic system for the exploitation of the economically weak. With its unfair salaries, with its unseemly evaluation of the human being according to the wealth and property instead of responsibility and performance. And we are determined to destroy the system under all conditions." Of course, that sounds, I guess, kind of nice that, everyone should be judged by who they are. Although, of course, Hitler didn't mean it like that. He meant they should be judged by their skin color, because he was a racist. And Churchill said that, this is sort of to prove that it's not part of Western civilization. Churchill was, of course, a very British, very Western, very colonialist person. And he said that there are only 2 places that socialism could work: in heaven, where it is not needed, and in hell, where they already have it. And he said a lot more about socialism. That was just my personal favorite quote. You can look him up and you can get a lot. And then they were also, of course, very authoritarian, Gestapo, SS, all that sort of thing. And they were there was a lot of media censorship, and they were very strict on what could be told to the public. And course, that is the opposite of what the right wants. The farther right you go, the less government you want, less censorship. But this is also flies in the face of Western civilization, as Western civilization sits on the more towards the right. And, there was, of course, only one party in Nazi Germany, and that was the Nazi Party, and they were really unchallenged. There wasn't really true elections in Germany. It was all very rigged, very violent, and Churchill, again, to prove sort of that this flies in the face of Western civilization, Churchill said that democracy is said to be the worst form of government, behind all other forms of government. And democracy is, of course, very liberal, very more right, and it believes in greater freedom, less authoritarianism. And authoritarianism is in itself inherently anti-Western because, of course, the British Empire was very light-handed, and I'm going to make a few videos on the British Empire. That's honestly a large part of what this channel is going to be about, but they were, of course, very heavy-handed in the way that the Nazis were very heavy-handed in the way they ruled versus the British or the French, who were a lot lighter and, believed in do as you will, though it harm no other. And there's in my liked videos, you can find the 1957 educational film by the Commonwealth of Nations. They call it The White Man's Burden, and that's a great film that really shows how the British interacted, especially in Africa, with the natives and how they treated them and how they helped them. And it's one of my favorite films of all time, really. It's only about 20 minutes long, so if you get a spare 20 minutes, check it out. It's pretty quick, or at least you should watch part of it. But it's very light-handed how they did it, and non-racist, believe it or not, versus the Nazis, who were incredibly racist and super heavy-handed in the way they governed. And, of course, you couldn't speak out against the Nazi government without being executed. And that really flies in the face of what it is to be a Western civilization. They were also atheists. I mean, there was cooperation between the Nazis and the Christian church, but the Nazis hated the church, and eventually they were going to disband. They wanted to get rid of it if they won. And, of course, that's very different from the colonial powers, and a lot of times the colonial powers are sort of looked down upon for how Christian they were and how they sort of tried to push that onto other people. And yeah, the Western powers were extremely Christian and extremely religious. They were not hardcore atheists like the Nazis. And I'll make a separate video on Islam, but the Nazis also worked closer with Islam, whereas the British and the French sort of didn't get quite as well along with Islam, and they had to really restrict a lot of aspects of it. And I'll talk about that in my video on Islam itself. Colonialism was another topic where Western civilization and the Nazis have greatly differed. And of course, overall, it was America and the British who fought the most to destroy the Nazis, and the Soviets too, but that was for different reasons. They weren't fighting because it was the right thing to do, they were fighting because the Nazis invaded them. But Hitler once said about colonialism, quote, "The whites have carried out to these colonial people the worst that they could carry, the plague of the world, materialism, fanaticism, alcoholism, and syphilis. Moreover, since what these peoples possessed on their own was superior to anything we could give them, they have remained themselves. The sole reason of the activity of the colonizers is they have everywhere aroused hatred." He was very anti-colonialist, and though it was in their goals after they won the war to retake the colonies lost in World War I, they didn't want to settle any of them, and they sort of didn't want to go to Africa all that much because, unlike the British or the French, who were heavy colonizers, and, well, not heavy-handed, but they heavily colonized, and a lot of people went there, and they really did care about Africa, versus the Nazis who didn't want to go there and who looked down upon colonialism as a whole. And the only reason Hitler wanted to retake the colonies that were lost in World War I because it was sort of a national embarrassment to lose those colonies. And that was one of the points where the Nazis and Western civilization, another major one, where they derailed. And this was a short look at Nazism, and I might do a more in-depth video in the future talking about Nazism. This is just sort of a basic, why the Nazis weren't part of Western civilization. Of course, it was an ideology that came from the West, but it was not part of Western civilization. And I feel like I'm going to have to bring that up in future videos, especially in rebuttal videos. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed. Have a good morning, good evening, or good night. And if you liked the video, leave a like. If you disliked it, dislike it, and tell me in the comments why you disliked it. I will see you in the next video.